hold the candle for a second. I shouldn't have lit it yet. I'm just lighting the shamash so we have both lights lit. Okay, happy Hanukkah, everyone. I'm here to give us a little rundown, an overview of this very special time of year on the Jewish calendar. The story of Hanukkah is far different than the Americanized version of it. The story goes back 2,500 years ago to the land of Israel, to Jerusalem, primarily over Jerusalem and the Temple Mount and the base of Mikdash. The second temple was standing then, having been built a couple of hundred years earlier after the Babylonian and Persian exiles. And we were there minding our own business when suddenly the Greek Empire invaded our land. And while they were benign at first under Alexander the Great, they quickly, and under the Ptolemy of Egypt, under the Seleucids and the Antiochus, the king in Syria, when they took over, it turned sour. And they oppressed us, and they abused us, and they tortured us, and they tried to eradicate the Torah from our midst, because everywhere they went in the world, the Greeks, they conquered. They spread their culture, they spread their version of the light of their civilization and their philosophy, the beauty of their art forms, etc. And we weren't listening, and we weren't buying any. And they didn't like that very much, because we held our Torah and the philosophy of our relationship with God to be superior to anything they could in their minds make up with their brilliant scholars and their deep thinkers. And they set about enslaving us and enthroning themselves above us. So they forbade us to learn the Torah, they forbade us to do circumcision, to keep the Sabbath, to keep kosher. All during this period, they would switch off different laws that they didn't want us to do. The Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the new moon, etc. So much so that the majority of our people ended up turning out of fear or just a desire to live in peace and with some kind of comfort, they threw their Judaism away for the most part and decided to Hellenize themselves and become good Greeks of the Greek Empire that they looked like, for all intents and purposes, as did later on the Roman Empire, that it was here to stay and was going to be eternal. And therefore they were afraid for their futures and their children and grandchildren, so they caved, and they ended up accepting all of the mores and the doctrine of the Greek philosophy and the Greek civilization and culture. And much to our chagrin, they allowed idolatry into the midst of our land, and they took over the Temple Mount and defiled it and set up idols in the temple to the pagan gods of the Greek mythology, the system of their cults and their worship. And it was a bitter fight that broke out. Now, I'll tell you briefly the little story of the legend, and it's not a myth, it really happened. It's recorded in our annals of the Talmud. That's a picture of the Talmud over there, one of the chapters, one of the pages. And it goes like this, that there was a retired high priest who had had enough of being in the Temple Mount with all the compromise and all the downright desecration of God's name that was going on in the name of Judaism. The Hellenists, or the Sadducees, were the Reform movement, the Reform Judaism of their time. And they said we have to modernize, we have to stay with the times, we have to stay with it, we have to get with it. And it was pathetic. And they were similar to any equivalent left-wing fascists of today, that they'll kill you just to impose their will upon you. And so they were slaughtering us, and with the protection of the Greek government, the Greek satrapy that was in place over Jerusalem, and they had armed legions occupying our land. And so these Jews felt they had carte blanche, they could do whatever they want, they had perfect protection. So this Matisyahu, elderly, retired Kohen Gadol, high priest, retired to Modim, his hometown, which is in the north a little bit of Jerusalem. And he was living out his days in bitter sadness and depression over the desecration of God's name and the defilement of the temple. And one day a Greek contingent happened through his town, and demanded the assembly of all the people of the town to come to the square, the center of town, and they erected an idol. They erected an altar there, put a bust of Antiochus on top of it, and they brought a pig into the ring of the circle around them and said, which Jew will step forward and sacrifice this pig to our God, Antiochus, our king, and worship this idol, this pedestal. And one Jew stepped forward. He was a known Jew, a renegade, a traitor. He had surgically, oddly enough, with pig skin, had surgically removed his circumcision and covered it over so he could participate in Greco wrestling, in the games, the sports and everything that they do. And he stepped forward to take the knife from the Greek captain and do what was requested of the Jews to show their allegiance to the crown, and he was ready to do it. And Matisyahu he had enough. Let's say he's 70 years old, 80 years old, whatever he is. He's an elderly man. He doesn't have any. He's frail. He's not a warrior anymore. The priests were rarely warriors, and they didn't have the body strength of this young, strapping Jew who was athletically fit, etc. But Matisyahu had enough. He reached his breaking point, and he ran into the circle. As the knife was being exchanged hands, grabbed it from the captain on its way to the Jew's hands, and stabbed the Jew and killed him right there on the spot. And he sparked a rebellion that day, that they fell upon the soldiers and wiped them out, and then they ran to the hills because they knew there was going to be retribution for what they've done. But the sons of this Matisyahu, he had 5 sons. They were known as the Hashmonaim. They were known as the Maccabees. Yehuda Maccabee, the famous Yehuda, but there was Shimon, there was Elazar, there was Yonatan, 5 of them. And for the next 50 years or so, they started a guerrilla warfare against the Greek armies marching and invading their land and occupying their land. And they have setbacks. Some of the Maccabees themselves got killed in the war. I think 3 or 4 out of the 5. But they sparked such an inspiration, such a overwhelming sense of we can't take this anymore, and we're going to fight to the death because life isn't worth living if it's on these terms where our Torah is desecrated and we're expected to kowtow to this way of life, and we're meant just to be lapdogs to the Greek Empire and not exert our manhood, exert our Judaism, exert our freedom to express our spiritual desires of soaring in the heights of the Torah and keep the mitzvahs as God has commanded on His sacred soil. And because of this and because of that, God made a miracle that they were few in number, poorly armed. They were started with a bunch of priests, which weren't the warrior class even in the best of times in Israel, and they sparked the rebellion that led to the inspiration to wipe them out. And God helped us that eventually within this 25 to 50 year period, we were succeeded in throwing them off. But this is where the story has a little twist that American Jews find hard to stomach, to contemplate. In fact, Meir Kahane once said if they really knew the storyline, the way it really was told, that it's not just Jew against Greek, but it's Jew against Jew, and a civil war broke out over Eretz Yisrael and over the Beis HaMikdash, the temple, they would write down with Hanukkah, and they would march against Hanukkah, and they wouldn't keep it. So in order to evade that, the American custom has become to make it like Christmas and to have presents instead of, it used to be just you're giving money to the kids who studied hard during Hanukkah to rededicate their efforts, that we dedicated ourselves to the Torah, that we didn't want to lose it, we didn't want to throw it away, we didn't want to allow people to dictate to us what we could and could not do with our lives. And as such, when we won this glorious victory and this miracle happened, during this time period, encourage the kids to study harder and rededicate their effort. And Hanukkah, the miracle of the war and the miracle of the lights lasting for 8 days, symbolizes our attempt and our struggle in that time period at great odds, which looked like impossible odds, to keep the light of God shining on earth. And that's the Torah. And we dedicate ourselves every year at this time to this message and to this spiritual legacy that we have in the heritage of Jewish history, that our forefathers taught us this and set this example for us, this ideal that the Torah is the most important thing in our lives, and Judaism and Eretz Yisrael and the Beis HaMikdash, the Temple Mount, is worth fighting for and not letting it go by the boards just so we can be safe and secure and live comfortable lives. We are here to struggle, to work to the bone to make our Jewish heritage survive. And it's not just God that we sit back and God does it all for us. We have to, the Hanukkah story showed that we have to make the effort. When our lives are on the line, like in the Purim story, that's when God comes and saves us. But he expects when his Torah is on the line, the spiritual world is on fire, that we show our love and dedication, that we're willing to fight and to die if necessary, to keep the light that he shined and showed toward us, to keep it in this world and not let it be eradicated. That's what Hanukkah is. And that's the message we have for all of our future generations, that we have to follow the example set by the Maccabees, and that we have to rally to the cause of Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, and into the Jerusalem, to keep Jerusalem united, to keep Eretz Yisrael, the Holy Land, in our possession, so that we can keep the mitzvahs of the Torah and learn the Torah in a place where God obligates us and desires for us to be there. And we were in great danger then, and we are in great danger again of losing hold of these principles and these ideals, and therefore we have to take a lesson from what was taught at this time of year so many centuries ago. We have to find a way to relive and rededicate ourselves to these principles in order to keep Torah alive in the world for our future generations.